Hello, and welcome to the Joyful Rebels podcast, where rebellion meets wellness. We've got Claire and Donna Thomas here, your mother daughter duo, and we are here to bring you some insight, some science, and maybe some laughs in our shared pursuit of finding more peace, joy, and balance in our physical and mental health. Thank you so much for listening, for joining us today as we share some practical tips to empower you on your journey to living your best life. Today is another episode of Ask the Joyful Rebels, where you ask and we answer. And today's question is centered on friendships, or
Mm.
more broadly, social wellness. So, Mom, I'm going to ask you, in terms of your friendships, how do you want to show up? How are you showing up in terms of your roles? And how do you want to show up? How do you want to be in those relationships?
Hmm. That's kind of broad,
Very
and
broad, very broad.
yeah, but we'll start here and we'll bring it in a little bit. I think the takeaway for me is how I have shown up in certain seasons is not necessarily how I show up now. And and I love that we'll get questions that people want just to have some discussion on, and then it's so awesome how it shows up in our lives in different ways. It's like it's top of mind, and so it's relevant, and it's so we get a chance to review it for a little while before we ever talk about it. And this past weekend I was on a retreat with bunch of other women, and so relationships and friendships was part of the discussion. And it was really cool because you take 10 women who essentially don't know each other, and everybody, you don't have to have any expectation of how you show up. You can be who you authentically are. And so that just kind of held a spotlight up to how have I been in the past and how do I want to be. And I know for a fact for me that I had a rough childhood. I didn't want to bring people over. I didn't have a bunch of friends. I was kind of a quiet kid, and then hardwired as being introverted just in general. I don't know which came first, but I just didn't have a lot of friends. And that carried through to being in fitness and being in a position where I was around a ton of people, but I had a different position in that group. And I had some positional power. So the relationship wasn't like peer to peer. It
Mm.
didn't feel that way because I was offering something. Did people like that? Or were they liking me? So I'm clearly that's my own stuff that was in there, but it was a barrier for me to develop some relationships as an adult. But the cool thing, spoiler alert, is that I've made some really specific decisions in this chapter of my life to allocate time toward investing in relational experiences because I do think it's important. It's not too late, and I've been richly rewarded. And I'll give you a couple hacks toward the end. But I noticed that there's a lifespan of ways that we show up, and we have influence in that based on how well we know ourselves in that season. So that's really my jump off point. How well do I know myself? How have I shown up? And that led us to looking at some research that's out there. And there's several, there's actually lots of research because social wellness is such a big thing, especially from the last several years and what we've been through. It's been highlighted. But I've loved looking at friends and what does that actually mean? Like, what are even the categories? So let's get a
Mm.
baseline. How about if I give you a list of 6 or 7 types and ways of personalities of what a friend can look like in a friend group. So as you're listening, Claire, and you joyful rebels out there, see if you can either say, oh, that's me, that are in some some friend groups I show up like that, or you can definitely go, that's somebody so and so. Because sometimes it's easier for me to go, that's so and so, as opposed to me, because it could be fluid and it can be a combination. But just see what comes up, your first response when you hear the name of this personality type and the description of it. Okay, so let me give you a few of those. So here we go. The first one would call it a builder. So the person that's in your group is a builder, and I love how it's described. It said this is a person that motivates and invests in the development of other people of the group. And good gracious, that I feel like that one was meant for me. I appreciate being in that spot. I would add to it and say that's the person that asks you a bunch of questions.
Mm.
So they're not telling you things. It's not like actual coaching or just giving advice because let's be honest, that's pretty annoying. I mean, or maybe you love it. Do you have friends that are just always giving you advice? Because that's not always what I'm looking for. Do you? Sometimes I just want to be heard, or sometimes I need to just walk out something and just I don't exactly know how I feel. And that friend is really good holding space and asking questions. So a builder builds that relationship up in certain situations. So that's one of them. The second one is a collaborator. So the collaborator, and this is where actually we're probably going to spend most of our time and our friendships in this type of a role because it's time spent with people who have similar interests or that just by proximity you see them all the time. And that made me think of when you guys were in certain sports or activities, like the parent group that came with that. Like you just inevitably, with given as many hours there are in a day, you're going to hang with those people because you're there for your kids. And if you're lucky, you
Mhm.
wind up meeting some cool people.
Yes.
Not always the case, but I've met some great people. Not even really friends with them anymore because you guys are grown-ups, but I think back fondly of the time that we shared. So a collaborator means you have similar interests and you're most likely to spend a whole bunch of time with them, at least in a seasons. So that's the collaborator. Another one is a connector. This is the person in the friend group that just knows people. They're like, you should meet this person over here. Or I know somebody that likes this thing and you're going to like them over here. And they're just always inviting you in and connecting you to other people. Like they're your networking friend. And I just came across somebody like this that it was a gift. This person just understood and had an idea off of one conversation that if this was happening, you need to talk to so and so. And that's the language. They're like, you got to meet so and so. You ever had that where people are like, you remind me of them, you guys are going to want to do that. But that always just broadens the friend network. And it's a very generous place to be to connect people that wouldn't normally encounter each other. So that's a generous space to be in. And if that's you, thank you, because we need you. The world needs you to do that. Okay, another one is the energizer. And this is the person that I would call just the fun one. Now, fun is not mutually exclusive to one person, but do you know that one person you're like, they're hilarious or they're always doing something fun? And I would like to add to that that there can be some really forward facing ways that this person always makes your time together really enjoyable. Those are the ones I want to ask them questions and make sure they're okay.
Mhm.
Because even if we have a role in how we show up, I think at least to some degree we know that. And so I want to show up as that person, whether that's subconscious or conscious, and just to make sure from a mental health standpoint that them especially want to make sure they're okay, or if they get quiet. So the
Mhm.
fun one, when that person gets quiet, I want to make sure, hey, is everything okay? And the permission, you don't have to show up like that every time. Because I think people are funny in lots of different ways, or they create a fun and enjoyable experience depending on where you're going. So I think that's a one that seems almost obvious, but somehow I feel it's a tender place to be and to be aware of that as well. Okay, a couple more. There's one that's called the mind opener. I love this. And do you have anybody who, what comes to mind for me is somebody who's traveled a lot. People that travel a lot know stuff. They've seen different cultures, different landscapes, they've experienced different food. Even the act of traveling has its own set of experiences because you interact with so many different types of people along the way and you're not comfortable in your home base. So I think nervous system is heightened and that adds to the experience. So that's not the only way it shows up, but the mind opener or also somebody who's got different ideas. Case in point for one of them was my college roommate who ended up being the CEO of Jenny Craig for many years. She was the first person that we had a mutual friend, and that friend was late. And me and my immaturity, I was like, "Meh, they're late. Yeah, it's affecting me." That's how it sounds in my head. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I hope they're okay." I didn't even think of it that something could happen, and that's why they weren't on time. I had it from my view and it was inconveniencing me. What a jerk, right? But and I just remember that was a stick in the spokes for me. oh, I didn't even know that that could be another way to look at it. And that's just one small example, but it can happen with philosophical ideas. It can happen with taste in things. Like they're just somebody that is interesting for reasons that are outside of our own understanding. And I think that's pretty cool. And then there's one more. It's called the navigator. And this is the person that I think of a navigation. It helps to keep me on the right path. And so that's somebody that knows you. I think boundaries when I think of that. I think somebody that's going to hold a mirror up and maybe even say, "Do you really want to do that?" And hold us accountable for some things, which I think could be a really loving place to be. If somebody's like, "You really want to do that? We were just talking about how busy you are. Maybe stop for a minute." So um that seems like it's kind of like the collaborator, or no, not the collaborator, the connector, but I really think it's got some interesting ways because that person knows you and wants the best for you and
Mm.
will help keep you moving in that direction. So, are you a builder or do you know one? Is there a collaborator in your life? Are you seasonally seeing people and hanging out with them because you have similar interests or you're just near them? Is there anybody that's a connector that builds bridges and networks, or the energizer, the fun friend that always just creates positive moments in your time together? Do they open your mind or do they help you navigate and get to wherever you want to go in a way that's authentic to you and that they know that it's authentic to you? So how's this landing, Claire? Any of these sound like you or friends you know, or where's
Yeah,
it
I
going?
mean, like you had said, as you're going through the list, I can either identify with it or I'm thinking of someone either in past friendships or current ones that kind of check that box. So that's really interesting. Um, I think for me, there's also when we ask that question at the beginning, it's how are you showing up and how do you want to show up? So for me, I was really feeling that pull of like, how do I want to be showing up? And I
Mhm.
really, the builder really calls out to me because I want to be someone to motivate and invest in me. And so I want to be that for someone else. Like I know how great that feels to have someone building you up because like, hello, imposter syndrome. And it seems like every new opportunity I have, there's always at least a little bit of time where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not qualified for this. So to be able to have a relationship where someone's like reminding you of
Mhm.
that evidence, no, remember, you're awesome and you've accomplished hard things before. So I think that if I'm not always consistently doing that, that's something that I want to be working on. And also when I hear builder, I hear accountability, like someone who's motivating you and investing in your development and it is also there. It reminds me a bit of the navigator as well, like checking in,
Mhm.
like, hey, you said you were going to be working on your
Mhm.
website. Like, how's it going? And
Mhm.
not in that like naggy, the voice of you said you were going to do this, but even just bringing it back front of mind, being able to brainstorm. Like, I have a friend where we can sit and brainstorm business ideas. And I think that's just so cool because that's not a relationship I necessarily needed or had when I was younger. And it's just one of those cool. So you talked about how friendships are seasonal and it's not too late to branch out and make new friends, which I think is a very hopeful message because I've also had bubbles in my life where I really wasn't talking to anyone. I mean, we're talking about what happened, a couple years ago, and everyone's world kind of got small. Um, I was not really branching out. And I've said that before, especially after my youngest was born. I really feel like my bubble was small and I was scared to even do things like go to the grocery store because I didn't want to make small talk with someone I might have, had relationships with in the past. So it's cool to know that yes, of course there's time to change, to form new relationships, or even to evaluate your role. So again, like I said, for me, how I am showing up, but also how I do want to show up. So I like builder. I like mind opener. And I want to add, you
Mm.
said, Mom, you thinking of someone who travels a lot. I'm also going to add someone who reads a lot.
Oh,
Um, because that's something I say to my kids that, you know, if you want to be more cultured, more knowledgeable, just really expand the boundaries of your mind, traveling is amazing. But if that's just not in the cards right now, reading. reading is up there
Mhm.
too, because you're going to get that exposure, right, to just things that aren't already living inside your brain, right? It's that new input that didn't come from inside. So I love to have conversations with friends who are just reading. And even if it's reading, genres I do like or genres I don't like, and just hearing people get excited about talking about what they're reading as well, like that lights me up. So I enjoy conversations with people who I guess would be called the mind openers.
Mhm.
Um,
Same.
and Mom, there are so many different lists of the friendship roles, and I think one that we've talked about in the past as well is like someone who might be called like a champion, and that'd be like
Mm.
someone who's a cheerleader. And I just have to say that that's also something, if I'm thinking about what I want to strive to be, I want to celebrate someone's small wins. Even if they say it in passing, I'm going to pause and be like, whoa, that's awesome that you did that. Because let's be honest, as women, I think we could use more of that. Because how many of you, if you're thinking of this, you're like, yeah, my role as a cheerleader, either with my friends or maybe in my family. If you've got kids, are you the one that's always like, great job? You're
Mhm.
using your energy to externally to build someone else up. But doesn't it feel so good when someone does that to you? So I think that that's something that I want to do more of, because I know how much it builds me up, and I want to be able to reciprocate that. Because, Mom, you did mention that you've had years and years of relationships that weren't necessarily friendships, because they weren't, it sounded like what you were saying is they weren't the going both ways, right? People
Mhm.
were getting benefits from you, but it was, you're on different levels there. And so I think about that in my friendships. Like, what do I want from a friend? But also, can I do the same thing back? And so I think that if you're looking at a group of friends, it's not like every person has to be one of these roles, right?
Right.
And maybe you're both cheerleaders for each other, and maybe you're both building each other up. And I think that when you're working together, and again, there's that back and forth, it's just going to strengthen that connection.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And I love the fluidity of going back and forth, uh, being depending on what the conversation is or what the situation is. And I do think that we are capable of being able to be all of those things because they live inside us so well. And I would add one other thing to the champion, which you really beautifully brought up, of being that cheerleader. Which I hear what you're saying about that name. Somehow that sounds like a thin version of it, but it's no, it's somebody who is like in your corner.
Mhm.
The only thing I would add to that is face to face, so important. I like the ones that do that in conversations that you're not even privy to,
Ooh.
the ones that are singing your praises and are speaking good of you when you are not even in the room. And those are, nobody's going to know, or they may not know, but those are the ones that are true friends. And those are the ones I want to hold closely, because that matters. And I think that can be in short supply because it's not, um, you don't see it right away. There's no way to like catch it. Like that
Yeah.
that can run rampant if it's not on the up and up. And it depends on the person's integrity and their relationship with you. It's asking more of the person to do that when you're not face to face. But I think they're
Hmm.
both necessary, and they're both consistent with how you want to show up in the world, whether it's face to face with other people in different situations. I think that's what I heard from that. Like you have that relationship with that person, you're always going to be in a positive way celebrating, and your words matter. Your words and your behaviors
Yes.
matter. So I am with you on that for sure. That's a lot. And one other thing I got to think of like what happens as we have these, small point is, it's not small. The last few years for me taught me, like, there's been a big cleansing. Have you felt that, Claire?
Yeah.
Like there's been a transition, and we hear it over and over again from people that they're saying my life feels different. Some of the relationships that you may not have now didn't mean that they didn't matter then, but what are we carrying into now? And Tom Rath, who wrote Vital Friends, just made a couple of really good points. So if you're looking at your friend group, and this is just an overall another thing to ponder as if you're walking your dog or doing something right now, if the 2 points, if the people in your friend group, or the handful of people that you talk to on semi-regular basis, and we'll get to that in just a second, that if that person wasn't there, would it change the satisfaction of your life? Would that drop? Like if they weren't in your life? I think that's a fair question. Would it have an effect on your, whether it's day to day or week to week? Like, would you miss them? Would there be a hole in the fabric of your life there? So that can happen in your personal life, the second question. And I think this is important too, especially for you guys that are working either part-time or full-time or whatever, that if you didn't have this person in your life, would your achievement or your engagement at work go down? I've certainly experienced that. If you're spending a whole bunch of time with a group of people that you may not have chosen because you're at work, but you have developed relationships, they're important in a different way. And then if that person's gone, how does it affect you? At least for a while until you find your footing. That's a grief that I don't know if I ever processed. It would just be like on to the next because
Mm.
it's work. You're not supposed to have all those feelings. Wrong. I got to look at that for what it is and the dynamics and my relational experiences have changed until you can either recover, mourn it, find something else to, whatever. I think that there's value in that too, to know that these relationships can happen in lots of different settings. So that was an eye opener for me because I felt it a lot at work as well as my personal life.
I like those questions. I think it is interesting to reflect. It's a little bit a different way to view the friendship. And especially that first one hits home for me. Would you miss that person? Would your life be less satisfying if they weren't there? Because I do agree with you that there was a lot of shifting a few years ago, again, when my bubble got a lot smaller. And sometimes the answer might be if you don't have that relationship anymore, is your life less satisfying? Sometimes the answer might be no. Are you missing them? No. And you know what? That doesn't mean it's a bad thing because, again, we talked about things being seasonal, relationships serving you at a certain point of time, especially with things like we said, if it's a vicinity type of thing, like all the moms on my kids' soccer team, right? And you're lucky if there's someone really cool and it might be something lasting. But I do think that having that evaluation, especially a few years ago, were there friendships that kind of fell to the wayside or I wasn't seeing them as much? And then, was that affecting me? Was there a hole there? And then when the answer is yes, well, then that's when I'm noticing that. I want
Mhm.
to reestablish a relationship with this person. I want to make sure they're still in my life. So kind of I went back and scooped up the people that were really important to me. And sometimes, again, I've said this before, but if you're a mom, especially with really little kids, you just at least for me personally, I didn't have the bandwidth to be the one who was reaching out and doing the texting or following up. If someone was texting me, I might be giving the one word response, and if you're on the other end of it, if you're the one who's getting the one word responses, that can be annoying and hard. But I try to tell myself, I don't know exactly what's going on. Like you said with your college roommate, oh, I hope that person's okay. I think that this rings true as well. Oh, I hope that person's okay. So there
Mhm.
were definitely times in my life where I wasn't the one responding. I wasn't the one, I'd go days and days without answering a message, which I am still sometimes guilty of. I apologize if you're
Same.
listening and you're one of those people. Um, but now it's that, hey, what do we do as Joyful Rebels? We reevaluate where we are. So, okay,
Mhm.
is this a season where I actually am going to reach out more? Oh, I am missing this relationship with this person. Have I been putting in my due diligence of an effort? Because it doesn't mean that it needs to be 100% you who's always reaching out
Right.
necessarily. And again, there's caveats and, unique situations, but I need to ask myself honestly, maybe I do need to reach out more. Maybe this person's struggling. And like you said, mom, maybe it's someone who used to be the loud, energetic person and they have gotten quiet. Maybe I do want to go reach out to this person. So I do think that was interesting you bringing that up because it's food for thought. Like I'm going to sit down and have a think about the current relationships I have and where they're at. And if you're listening, I think it's a good idea for you to do that too. And I know, Mom, as we're getting towards the end here, that you
Mhm.
said that you had two hacks
Mhm. I
for
do.
talking about social wellness and friendships, and I actually haven't heard these. So I'm
Okay. Well,
edging my seat here with the rest of y'all listening. So
uh, actually, three things, and then we'll
cool.
bring you home here. But I love how we can get creative. We are creative beings, and not one person said that you have to be face to face with somebody in order to have a relationship. I wonder if that's an old core value that I had been walking around with. Like that's the gold standard. It has to be that. It can, and those are great relationships, but if it doesn't have to be that way. So I just want us to open up what is acceptable, what fits, what feels good. It could be non-traditional, but we're the ones that are creating what things look like now that we can sustain in a way that feels good. So how it's showing up in my life right now is I like doing breakfast. Like I used to like to go out to dinner and then hang out at night. And I like my time for how I want to spend my day and my night, that doesn't jive with where that is right now. So my thing is going to an early breakfast and having great conversation because of course I'm drinking coffee. So it's quick pace and we're having a good time. But also that before we leave the table, we have made a date for the next time we're going to meet. And I have a handful of friends where it's a month from now, 6 weeks from now, and at least it's in the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And we have had times like, oh, I can't make it. Can we do it another time? But at least there is a marker there. Because otherwise, for me, out of sight, out of mind. If it's not in there, I'll be like, what? So, and then I realized that there just wasn't a follow-up. But here's this, it keeps them top of mind for me. I know that I'm going to see them again. And that week, if I review where I'm going, I'm like, oh, I'm having breakfast with so-and-so. Like, yay, I'm going to have breakfast with Marianne. And then I get to think about them. And that gives me anticipatory like excitement. I'm like, I'm ready to go. So I feel like I'm getting the benefits of a good friendship. It's concentrated and it's concentrated at a different time frame. So that has been different for me. Make your appointment for the next time you're going to go because otherwise it doesn't happen. The second one is I've got a bunch of friends that are across the country, and one of them, our timelines aren't syncing with how our day is, and she's got little ones, and those aren't the times that work for me with clients and other things. So we just had a really honest conversation, and it really came down to either we don't connect or we're going to use voice messaging and texting. Like, how about if we do that for a little while? And I love that we set the ground rules. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
like respond in 24 hours, like you were talking about, Claire. It's like it might be days. Like there is no expectation that this is not coming up. You know, it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be whatever. But there's usually a couple of really great topics that are in this text to address and then further the conversation. What means is that I'm hearing what's happening. I get to digest it and I get to see it. And I'm always better at comprehension that way. But then
Mm-hmm.
I can thoughtfully and then be more articulate in my answer back. And I find those are really rich too. And if the alternative is not having a
Mm,
relationship with that person, I'm not going to do that
yeah.
because this too shall pass. And so we have like, let's use the technology that can sometimes trip us up and use it for good in this season. So it always comes back to, for me, on do I know myself in this season and what would work or what feels good? And can I lean into that? And quite frankly, a lot of times as an adult, I'm still guessing, but the guessing is getting more creative and I'm willing to experiment and see how it goes. And all of that is with curiosity, with the heart space to still continue to build relational equity with people that I care about. So I do want to give one last final, hopefully it makes your heart feel good. For you mamas that have little kids right now, and you're just in the deep end. It takes a lot of time. It takes hyper focus, and it's worth it. Like that is a main characteristic of just that role. And if I think about that, maybe you have your kids for 18 years, maybe, and then they go do something else. Maybe keep this in front of you, please. That if we continue to invest in each other, at least in some appropriate way for the ages that they are, and with faith and hope and trying, like just staying engaged, that we're going to have all this time when they're 18 to 25, 30, 40, 50. Like most of the time you're going to have a relationship with your kids as adults. And Claire, it is so important to me that we get a chance to have these conversations and get to know each other and share them with people that are listening. Like this is all like it is more of a peer friendship. Like clearly we have our roles, but it does shift. Know that that's coming. And if we invest in a way that feels honest and real, and we just do the best that we can, our kids are going to want to have conversations with us instead of being like, ah, for the love of all things holy, I don't want to do that. That is the real gift. That is the real gift that we have the luxury of some time and to build what it looks like at this stage of our lives. So if you have a complicated relationship with your mom or your daughter or whatever, then just you are welcome at this table at any time. And I want you to look at these conversations in that light, through that lens, that this is what it can look like as we get older, and you can open up some of your social, I can call it a friend, but it's a social wellness that's bigger than that. And that can be part of the ways that we stay connected. We can go through these roles. You can show up in ways that you want to, and you can shift in the season that you want to. But if we have just a couple of people that we feel like we can do that with, then that's a rich life. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be 1,000. It could be a couple. And so I'm just so grateful that Claire, that you're one of the ones I get to do that with. And again, our table, there's going to be a seat for you guys, you joyful rebels, anytime you come with us, because we can do this together and just keep having conversation and opening our hearts. So,
I,
and
I love that, Mom. I love that. I think I think that we are a cool example of what it can look like as a mother and a daughter, as an adult relationship, and this growth, this journey that we're going on together. Like,
mm,
it's not our relationship is unique, but you can have a unique relationship as
yes,
well if you're listening. And so I think it's cool to be able to be an example of that. Because I can't say that for our whole journey, I could have predicted that this is where
mm-mm,
we would have ended up. What do you think? No.
nope,
um, and I completely echo what you're saying to the moms of little ones. I think that cliche, the days are long, but the years are short. Man, does that get truer and truer every day. So if
yeah,
you're down in the trenches, there it is worth it. I think that you said it great. It's worth it. Um, for you listening, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you take a chance, take a moment, evaluate your friendship, the roles that you have now, the roles that you want to have. And if anything, you can take away some of these little hacks. Maybe you're scheduling friendship dates. Maybe you're setting some ground rules or expectations or lack of, and using technology for good, right? Voice memos, text messaging, they can be used for good. So thank you so much for joining us again. We appreciate it. There's always room at our table for you. Until next time, Rebels.